and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going back to a moment in history where a single battle didn't just decide a fight, it completely redrew the map.
It really did.
We're unpacking the Battle of the Nile, August 1st, 1798. And this deep dive is really a shortcut to understanding one of the most brilliant and, frankly, audacious naval victories ever.
It's military history at its absolute best. You've got the revolutionary French fleet under Vice-Admiral Brueys, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves. They've just dropped Napoleon's army off in Egypt.
They've done the hard part.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have Great Britain's Admiral Horatio Nelson, who's been on this relentless, almost obsessive hunt across the Mediterranean.
And the stakes here, I mean, we're not just talking about a few ships. This is for control of the entire Mediterranean.
Yeah.
It's about whether Napoleon's grand vision for the East lives or dies.
Well, let's just jump to the end so you know where this is all headed. Nelson wins. And it's not just a win, it's a complete annihilation. He destroys or captures almost the entire French fleet in a single night.
And that single event is the reason Napoleon's big Egyptian adventure begins to unravel.
That's the core of it. The campaign on land was, in many ways, a success, but this loss at sea doomed it from the start.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Why is Napoleon, a guy famous for land battles, sailing an army to Egypt in the first place? What's the big idea?
The big idea is, well, it's about geopolitics and money. The French mission was incredibly ambitious. Napoleon saw Egypt as a stepping stone.
Not the final prize.
Not at all. The real target was Britain and its trade route to India, the lifeline. If he could take Egypt, maybe move east, he could essentially cut Britain's economic throat and force them to the negotiating table in Europe.
So this is a massive strategic gamble.
Yeah.
And they'd already pulled off the first, most dangerous part, getting the army to Alexandria without being caught.
Right. They'd taken Malta on the way. They'd landed the troops. That success must have created this huge sense of confidence, of invulnerability even.
They probably felt they owned the Mediterranean at that point.
I think so. The French assumption was, we did it. The Navy's job is done. We control this theater now.
But there's this shadow hanging over them, and that shadow is Horatio Nelson. He wasn't there for the landing. He was chasing them.
He was, and it's so important to remember how hard that was. There's no radar, no satellites. You're relying on intelligence, rumors, and just sheer luck. Nelson actually missed the French fleet completely at one point.
He sailed right past them.
Sailed ahead of them, actually, without even knowing it. It must have been infuriating for him, a colossal intelligence failure.
But that just highlights what made him Nelson. He didn't pack it in and go home.
No, he turned that frustration into this ferocious determination. He crisscrossed the Mediterranean, basically running on a hunch that Napoleon had to be going for Egypt. And that sheer persistence, that intuition, is what led him to finally find them.
And he finds them anchored in Aboukir Bay, near Alexandria. They thought they were safe.
They thought the job was over. And this is where we get to the fatal error.
The catastrophic mistake that defines this whole battle.
It really is. So let's dig into that, because this is where Nelson's genius collides with French complacency. The French are anchored in a line, parallel to the shore. To them, this formation looks invincible.
Okay, so why did they feel so safe? What was it about that anchorage?
Well, it's a classic defensive setup. You have your strongest side, all your guns, facing the open sea. That's where any conventional attack would have to come from.
Makes sense.
And they anchored close to the shore, thinking that the shallow water, the shoals, would protect their other side, their inner flank. Geography was supposed to be their ally.
So a wall of guns facing the sea, and what they thought was an impassable barrier of shallow water on the other side. On paper, it's a fortress.
On paper, yes. But here's the flaw. They were unprepared for battle at anchor. See, when you anchor for the night, the routine changes. Sails get furled, things get stored on the gun decks.
It's not a ship on high alert anymore.
Not at all. And crucially, the guns facing the shore, the ones they thought were safe, they were often blocked with supplies. The crews were resting or doing other jobs. I mean, who attacks from the shallow side?
So they were basically only ready to fight in one direction. It sounds like an open invitation if you're bold enough to try it.
And Nelson was bold enough.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just that he found them, it's when he found them, late in the day. He decides to attack at dusk.
Attacking at dusk seems incredibly risky for the attacker too. You're giving up daylight?
It's fraught with peril. It meant Nelson's pilots had to navigate those dangerous shoals Brueys was relying on in failing light. But the payoff was surprise. The French had zero time to react. They couldn't move, they couldn't reform their line, they were stuck.
Which brings us to the tactical masterstroke, the double attack. The French are expecting a head-on fight ship to ship, from the sea. Nelson does another. Something else entirely.
This is pure Nelson, pure genius. He saw that the gap between the first French ship and those shoals, it was narrow, it was dangerous, but he believed it was navigable. He ordered 5 of his lead ships, starting with the Goliath, to sail inside the French line, between them and the shore.
Hang on, how dangerous was that? You're talking about these massive warships in shallow, uncharted water at twilight under enemy fire.
The risk was immense. I mean, if one ship runs aground, the whole plan falls apart. But the advantage was huge. By slipping in there, the British suddenly had the French ships sandwiched.
So they're getting hit from both sides.
From both sides at once. The front of the French line is getting battered by one British ship from the sea and another from the shore. They can't maneuver, they can't properly defend themselves.
That's psychologically devastating. It just completely turns their defensive formation into a death trap.
An absolute death trap. And by concentrating all that fire on the first few ships in the French line, Nelson basically ensures the ships further back can't really help. It's a localized, overwhelming assault.
Let's talk about that engagement then. Because the result wasn't just a victory, it was a massacre.
Overwhelming is the perfect word. Of the 13 French ships of the line there, 11 were either destroyed or captured. Just gone.
Think about that. The investment, the resources, the thousands of men, all wiped off the board in a few hours.
It's the naval equivalent of losing an entire army. Only 2 of their main ships and 2 smaller frigates managed to slip away in the chaos of the night.
And if you had to pick one moment, one event that sealed the deal, what would it be?
Oh, it's the destruction of the French flagship, L'Orient. This was a monster of a ship, 120 guns, the pride of their fleet.
The command center, what happened to it?
It came under a relentless, concentrated attack from several British ships at once. And around 9 p.m., a fire broke out on its deck. The fire spread, and eventually it reached the powder magazine.
And the descriptions of that explosion are just incredible. They say it was heard for miles, lit up the entire bay.
It was a cataclysm, a flash that turned night into day, and then this awful silence as the ship just vanished. Debris rained down for minutes. It killed Admiral Brueys, decapitating the French command.
That moment must have just broken the will of every other French ship still fighting.
Absolutely. The symbol of their power and their commander gone in an instant. The human cost just underscores how one-sided this was.
What were the numbers?
The British suffered around 900 casualties. The French, their losses, including killed, wounded, and captured, were around 6,200.
Wow. That ratio says everything about how effective Nelson's tactic was.
It does. It was the perfect counter to a static, overconfident defense.
So the tactical win is clear. But let's connect the dots. How did this one night of fighting actually lead to the failure of Napoleon's entire Egyptian campaign?
The immediate impact was total. French naval power in the Mediterranean was crippled, gone. Britain was now, without question, the dominant sea power in the region.
And there's the trap. Napoleon has his army on land, but he's now completely cut off.
Exactly. His army is stranded in Egypt. And think about what that means. No reinforcements, no reliable supplies from France, and most importantly, no way home. No escape route.
All his victories on land suddenly become sort of hollow. He's won territory he can't hold indefinitely.
It puts an expiration date on the whole project. The campaign of conquest turns into a mission of survival. And eventually, Napoleon himself has to, abandon his army and sneak back to France.
So this battle is the direct cause of that. It solidifies British naval supremacy and marks a huge turning point in the war against revolutionary France.
A massive turning point. And for Nelson, personally, it made him a legend.
It turned him into a national hero, right?
An international hero. This battle showcased his unique genius. It wasn't just about fighting harder, it was about thinking differently. He saw that the rules the French were playing by were actually their biggest weakness.
And that's why it's still studied today. It's a masterclass in exploiting an opponent's assumptions.
It really is. The French were beaten by an idea before the first cannonball really did its work.
So if we boil it all down, the key takeaway here is that the Battle of the Nile is this perfect example of how you can achieve a decisive victory by exploiting complacency. The French felt secure, they trusted their position, and Nelson used audacity and tactics to shatter that security.
And that raises one last thought for you to ponder. The fact that a single naval battle, miles from any land army, could trap and ultimately doom a massive, victorious land army. Well, it just underscores the absolute importance of logistics and sea power.
Land armies take the ground, but navies control the supply lines.
Precisely. It makes you wonder what other great historical campaigns were won or lost, not on the battlefield, but because of a single catastrophic defeat at sea that left an army completely alone.
That's a fundamental truth of warfare that echoes through the ages. Something to think about. Until next time, keep digging deeper. Welcome to the Deep Dive. So you've brought us a fascinating stack of sources this time, and they're really forcing us to look past, the smoke and cannon fire of naval history and focus on what happened after.
That's right.
We are sailing back to 1798 to a very specific strategic spot off the coast of Egypt for a deep dive into the Battle of the Nile. A clash that wasn't just a victory, it was the strategic pivot point of the entire Napoleonic era.
It's a battle that's often overshadowed, by the big land battles that came later, but the consequences, the consequences of this single engagement in Aboukir Bay are just staggering.
Right.
Our mission today is to move beyond the tactics of Admiral Nelson, as brilliant as they were, and really analyze the profound strategic consequences. We're looking at how this one British victory fundamentally reshaped global geopolitics.
And it isolated one of history's greatest armies.
Completely. And it secured a kind of naval dominance that lasted for generations.
When you look at the source material, the central premise is just undeniable. One battle in one bay didn't just win the day. It fundamentally reset the entire strategic balance of power on the continent.
It made future French ambitions, especially anything aimed at the East, basically impossible.
So it was more than just losing some ships.
Oh, much more. It was a structural collapse. It doomed Napoleon's most audacious campaign before it could even really take root.
Okay, let's unpack this then. How did this one battle, fought hundreds and hundreds of miles from Paris, managed to create a physical, inescapable trap for Napoleon and his thousands of veteran soldiers?
And at the same time,
galvanize a hostile alliance across all of Europe.
Well, the devastating consequence was purely military. When Napoleon set sail for Egypt, that French fleet was absolutely crucial. It wasn't just, a transport service.
It was his lifeline.
It was the logistical umbilical cord connecting his entire expeditionary force back to France. So when Nelson descended upon them, the British didn't just win a fight. They annihilated the French naval presence in the Mediterranean.
And we're talking about, 11 of 13 ships of the line captured or destroyed.
Including the flagship, the massive Lorient.
That's not a defeat. That's a complete erasure of an entire naval arm.
It is, and this leads directly to what our sources call the isolation effect. It's the immediate strategic consequence. Just think about Napoleon's position for a second.
Okay.
He had successfully landed his army, he was winning battles inland, he was projecting power all the way towards Syria, but suddenly his army was completely and totally cut off.
But wasn't he still winning on land? He's Napoleon. Couldn't he have just kept going and, negotiated an escape or found another way out?
That assumes he could sustain the fight, and the reality of being marooned hit them instantly. The sources really emphasize this, that the isolation immediately prevented any hope of getting reinforcements or fresh troops.
Or supplies.
Or, most crucially, the specialized things they needed. Siege artillery, powder, medical supplies, everything you need to sustain a major multi-year campaign so far from home.
Right. An army's strength is only as good as its supply chain. Without those specific provisions, that grand strategic ambition, conquering Egypt, disrupting Britain's road to India, it's all just reduced to a ticking clock.
A ticking clock until the army starves or runs out of ammunition. Precisely.
An impossible situation.
It created an untenable position. And imagine the psychological toll on those soldiers. You're trapped between a hostile desert population on one side and an uncrossable sea on the other.
A sea now firmly controlled by the most powerful navy in the world.
Exactly. And while Napoleon was a genius on land, there's no question he was entirely dependent on that naval logistical support. So the failure at the Nile contributed fundamentally to the eventual costly failure of the whole French-Egyptian campaign.
So without that naval control, the army became a liability.
A huge liability, not an asset.
So the genius of Nelson's victory then, it wasn't just about destroying the ships, it was turning the Mediterranean into a vast military prison cell.
That is the essential insight.
It was a physical sealing off of an entire army far from home, guaranteeing that the French strategic objective would just collapse.
Yes. The battle didn't just win a tactical engagement, it decided the fate of tens of thousands of soldiers hundreds of miles away. It transformed what was meant to be a stepping stone to a global empire into, well, a dead-end military occupation.
So we've established the military trap in Egypt, but the consequences, they immediately scale up and start to redraw the maps of Europe. Let's shift our discussion from the localized military impact to the massive geopolitical earthquake this victory caused.
Right. The destruction of the French fleet instantly solved Britain's most pressing strategic dilemma, which was securing the Mediterranean.
This was non-negotiable for them.
Absolutely. It guaranteed the safety of their vital sea routes, specifically the link to India and their colonies, and it established Britain's ability to maintain forward bases, like Malta, which they very quickly exploited.
And that security, in turn, widened Britain's influence dramatically across the whole region.
It did.
So Britain wasn't just safer, it became the undisputed master of the ways in that theater. And suddenly, their position in Europe is re-energized. They have this massive, tangible victory that proves their superiority at sea.
And it gave them incredible leverage to organize against Napoleon,
Which they used immediately.
That leverage was immediately converted into political capital. The victory at the Nile gave crucial confidence to those European powers who were already deeply, deeply nervous about Napoleon's aggressive expansionism.
And his tendency to just unilaterally redraw borders whenever he felt like it.
Exactly. And that's where you get the direct impact on alliances. The success of the British fleet was the primary catalyst for the formation of the Second Coalition against France.
It gave them the political spine they needed to commit to another costly land war.
The coalition was serious and multifaceted because Napoleon had upset so many powerful interests at the same time. Our sources specify Austria, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire all joining forces.
Which is a very strange group of allies.
It is, and it's important to understand their different motivations because you're right, they weren't natural allies at all.
So tell us more about that. How do you get the Tsar, the Sultan, and the Habsburg Emperor all on the same team?
It was a collective reaction to what they saw as an existential threat. The Ottoman Empire, of course, was directly threatened by the French invasion of Egypt, which was Ottoman territory. For them, it was a fight for sovereignty. Simple as that.
Okay.
Russia, under Tsar Paul I, was terrified of French Republican expansionism threatening the monarchies of Europe, and they also feared French influence in the Near East. They saw the Mediterranean as their backyard.
In Austria, always keen to reclaim lost territory in Italy and along the Rhine, saw this as the moment. This was France's moment of vulnerability.
Precisely. The news of Napoleon's army being trapped in the Levant was the definitive signal Europe was waiting for. It showed that France, for all its land power, was vulnerable to a coordinated effort.
And the goal of the coalition was simple.
Very simple. To resist, contain, and roll back French expansion. So Napoleon suddenly faced this hostile ring of powerful nations on land, while his logistical lifeline was just irrevocably cut by sea.
That's a staggering picture. But the cost to France,
Yeah.
it went deeper than just these immediate geopolitical troubles, didn't it? This handicapped them for decades.
Oh, far deeper. This is maybe the most crippling long-term consequence. We're moving from the strategic to the structural now. The Nile victory severely damaged French strategic planning, yes, but it fundamentally crippled their naval capabilities, and the sources state a crucial detail here.
Which is
France was unable to replace its lost fleet for decades.
decades. Why was replacement so difficult? I mean, it seems incredible that a nation as wealthy and populous as France couldn't rebuild a few dozen warships relatively quickly.
It really boils down to resources and expertise. Building a major warship in the late 18th century was an immense industrial undertaking. France was already heavily engaged in continuous, costly land wars.
Which drained the treasury and diverted resources.
Exactly. Resources like timber, manpower. They lost skilled officers and experienced sailors, and you just cannot replace those instantly. And crucially, British naval dominance, now cemented by the Nile, meant France struggled to import necessary raw materials.
Like what?
Things like pitch and high-quality mast timber from the Baltic, which were absolutely vital for shipbuilding. The British could just blockade them.
So the victory didn't just win a battle in 1798. It essentially neutralized France as a major naval power for the next 20, maybe 30 years. That's the permanent strategic damage.
It removed their ability to effectively project power globally, which, had been the whole point of the Egyptian expedition in the first place.
They were forced to focus inward on the continent.
Yes. And meanwhile, the victory simultaneously boosted British morale and prestige to unheard of levels, cementing their role as the global guarantor of trade and security on the high seas.
It's just amazing that one event could have such sustained, multi-generational impact on one nation's strategic capability versus another's. So let's transition now to the battle's legacy beyond the immediate conflict, how it influenced military doctrine worldwide.
What's fascinating here is that the Battle of the Nile provided this undeniable, visceral proof of a principle that would govern global conflict for the next century.
The absolute importance of naval supremacy.
Exactly. The source material is very clear that this victory made naval control decisive, not just beneficial, but decisive for projecting and sustaining military power across regions.
It elevated sea control from just, an important factor to a necessary precondition for any kind of global ambition. If you can't secure the sea, you can't supply your armies, you can't protect your trade, you can't maintain a global sphere of influence.
Precisely. This realization secured the Royal Navy's dominant role, not just through the rest of the Napoleonic Wars, but far beyond. It underpinned the whole British global security structure, the concept of Pax Britannica, for the entire 19th century.
They knew, and the world knew, that no major military operation could proceed without their, at least, tacit approval at sea.
Yes, and Nelson himself became the textbook example of how to achieve that decisive control. It wasn't just the sheer number of guns he brought to the fight, it was how he chose to fight. That's what really influenced future doctrine.
Absolutely. The Battle of the Nile wasn't just about firepower. It was about innovative tactics and, frankly, audacity. The traditional naval battle involved engaging ship for ship in a long, predictable line.
Nelson defied convention, and the sources highlight his two most brilliant moves.
Which were?
First, he attacked late in the afternoon, right at sunset. He knew the French wouldn't expect a full engagement until morning. That decision alone introduced chaos and confusion into the French line.
And the second?
Second, and this was the most innovative part, the French fleet was anchored in a defensive line close to the shore. Nelson ordered part of his fleet to sail between the French ships and the beach, a maneuver the French assumed was impossible because of the shallow water.
So he effectively doubled up his attacking force on the exposed part of the French line. He caught them in a devastating crossfire.
Exactly. It broke every convention of maritime warfare at the time. It proved that daring, aggressive concentration of force, even against a defensively positioned enemy, could yield total destruction. Our sources designate the Battle of the Nile as nothing less than a textbook example of decisive maritime warfare.
Influencing naval strategies around the globe for generations.
For generations.
So what does this all mean for us? We have a single battle that achieved, three critical things? The immediate isolation of one of history's greatest armies.
Check.
The successful creation of a massive European coalition against France, which fundamentally altered the Continental War. And the establishment of a global security paradigm based on unquestioned naval supremacy, which pretty much determined who got to project power for the next 100 years. It's hard to find a single event with such profound, far-reaching consequences.
It is truly exceptional in its scope. The reverberations lasted long after the smoke cleared from Aboukir Bay. The short-term result was Napoleon trapped in Egypt and politically weakened back home. But the long-term result was the British Royal Navy solidifying its strategic dominance.
All built on the reality that France simply could not replace its lost fleet for decades.
The entire strategic focus of the war shifted to Britain's advantage that night.
The power of logistics, vulnerability in sea lanes, all crystallized in a single victory.
So we spent this deep dive analyzing how Nelson's victory made naval control decisive for projecting military power and isolating an opponent from critical supplies. Consider this. If one battle could establish such a precedent that cutting off supplies equals campaign failure, how many modern conflicts still hinge on that same underlying concept?
Securing vital logistical routes and isolating an opponent.
Right. Whether it's by air, sea, or increasingly cyber warfare targeting supply chain management, the principle remains constant. So what modern-day sea route or logistical choke point holds a comparable strategic value today? Something that could determine global military success or failure. That's what's worth thinking about next. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into a moment in military history that, honestly, it still feels a bit unbelievable. We're looking at Admiral Horatio Nelson's night attack at Aboukir Bay back in 1798. And our mission for this deep dive is to get past the simple recap of who won. We want to understand how. How did Nelson pull off a maneuver that, by all the rules of 18th century naval warfare, should have been completely impossible?
It's one of those moments where you really have to set the scene to get the full picture.
Right.
You've got the French fleet under Admiral Brueys anchored in what they believe is a perfect defensive position in Aboukir Bay.
They feel safe.
Completely safe. And the key thing, their biggest security blanket was the sun. It was setting on August 1st, 1798, and Brueys was absolutely convinced the British wouldn't dare attack in the dark.
So that's the central question for us, and really for you listening. Why would you attack at dusk? In uncharted waters, no less? It just screams of unnecessary risk. Why not just wait for the morning?
By any conventional standard, it was a huge risk. But Nelson didn't really operate by conventional standards.
Clearly not.
His whole philosophy was about surprise. The second he saw the enemy, he signaled for an attack. No delay. He understood that the psychological advantage of hitting them when they felt safest was worth more than waiting for the morning light.
Let's really get into that danger, though, because this is where it feels like it's a thin line between genius and just madness. You mentioned the French were anchored near shoals.
Treacherous ones. Sandbanks, shallows, all uncharted by the British.
So Nelson is ordering his massive ships of the line to navigate this minefield, basically, as the light is feeling. What happens if one of them runs aground?
It's a total disaster. A ship of the line that runs aground is out of the fight. Instantly. Becomes a sitting duck, a stationary target, and it could even block the path of the ships coming up behind it.
So the whole attack could just grind to a halt.
Exactly. Any other commander would have hesitated. But Nelson was betting that the sheer shock and speed of his attack would overwhelm that risk.
And he could only make that bet because of something he'd done beforehand, right? This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment gamble.
That is the absolute key. This high-risk plan only worked because of the months of preparation. And not just drilling, but talking.
Talking.
He had spent countless hours with his captains, his band of brothers, discussing every possible scenario.
Yeah.
They knew his mind. They knew he wanted to attack from both sides if possible. He trusted them.
So it's not a rigid top-down plan, it's decentralized command.
It's total delegation. He knew his captains were brilliant sailors, and he gave them the freedom to use their own initiative once the battle started. When the signal to attack came, they didn't need a detailed map. They just needed to execute the spirit of the plan.
Which was basically, get in there, attack hard, and find a way.
Find a way. Precisely.
Okay, so let's unpack the maneuver itself. This is where that initiative really shines. He splits his force into two divisions.
That's right. The idea was to create a tactical envelopment, hitting the French line from both sides at once.
The first division was the more predictable one?
Yes, the seaward attack. That was led by Nelson's own flagship, the Vanguard. They engaged the main French line from the sea, just as you'd expect. But that was almost a distraction.
For the real move.
For the real revolutionary move. The landward attack.
Okay, so picture this. The French are anchored with their guns pointing out to sea, thinking the shallow water and the shore protect their other side.
That was their fatal mistake. Nelson's 2nd Division sailed right into that supposedly safe gap between the French ships and the coastline.
That's incredible. They turned the French defense completely inside out. How on earth did they navigate that channel without just, beaching the entire squadron?
Came down to sheer nerve and the skill of one particular captain. The sources all point to Captain Thomas Foley on the Goliath.
He's the one who takes the lead.
He is. He saw a small gap between the lead French ship and the shoal and just went for it.
Yeah.
He had this famous quote, something like, "Where there is room for a French ship to swing, there is room for an English ship to sail."
I love that. That's the whole attitude right there.
It is. And to answer your navigation question, it was incredibly tense. They were taking soundings as they moved.
What does that mean exactly?
It means sailors are at the bow of the ship, literally dropping a weighted line into the water every few seconds to shout out the depth.
No. Okay.
Yes. So imagine doing that in the dark with the enemy right there, guns about to open up. It's just the skill and the calm under pressure is astonishing.
And as this is all happening, it's getting darker and darker. The smoke is filling the air. How did they even tell friend from foe?
Nelson thought of that. A small detail, but a crucial one. He ordered every British ship to hoist 3 lanterns, horizontally, high up on their masts.
A unique ID.
A unique ID. It was the only way to maintain any kind of coordination in that chaos, to stop ships from firing on each other by mistake.
So you have the landward division now sailing past the French, firing into their unprotected side, and the seaward division hammering them from the other.
And that's why it was so devastating. The first 5 ships in the French line were suddenly taking fire from both sides simultaneously.
And Brueys hadn't prepared for that.
Not at all. His crews on the landward side, their guns weren't even fully manned. Some were cluttered with supplies. They thought they were safe.
It's a total nightmare scenario for them. They're trapped.
They're completely trapped. The ships further down the line can't move up to help because they're all anchored in place. The French plan it shattered in minutes.
And all of this chaos, this battle, it builds to this one iconic, climactic moment.
The destruction of the French flagship, L'Orient.
Right.
After hours of just brutal close quarters fighting, it catches fire. And then around 10 o'clock at night, its powder magazine explodes.
I can't even imagine what that must have looked like.
The accounts say it was a blast that lit up the entire bay. It was so huge, so shocking, that for a moment, the battle actually stopped. Both sides just paused in awe. It was the exclamation point on the whole victory.
It really sums up Nelson's leadership, doesn't it? The audacity, the planning, the trust in his captains, all leading to that one decisive blow.
It's a masterclass. The result was just overwhelming. Out of 13 French ships of the line, the British captured or destroyed 11. It was an almost total annihilation of the French fleet.
So let's zoom out now. We've seen the tactical brilliance. What was the so what? What did this victory actually mean on the grand strategic stage?
Well, it effectively stranded a rather famous general who was in Egypt at the time.
Napoleon
himself. His whole Egyptian campaign was meant to threaten British interests in India to build a new French empire in the east. That fleet in Aboukir Bay was his lifeline, his supplies, his reinforcements, his way home.
And Nelson just cut it.
Severed it completely. Napoleon's army was now trapped in Egypt. He was forced to abandon his grand ambitions there, which, drastically changed the strategic map. Britain now had total control of the Mediterranean.
So this one battle arguably stalls Napoleon's rise, or at least closes a major door for him.
It was a massive blow to French power and prestige, and a huge boost for the coalition forming against him. It really cemented Britain's role as the dominant naval power, and of course, turned Nelson into a legend.
It's just a perfect example of how one high-risk, high-reward action can change the course of history. So, to bring it all home for you, the listener, there are a few key takeaways here. First, that idea of trust and initiative. Nelson empowering his captains to make those bold moves.
Like fully on the Goliath.
Exactly. Second, the hidden power of preparation. Those pre-battle talks were the foundation for victory. And third, and maybe the most important, exploiting your enemy's assumptions. Brueys thought the sunset made him safe. Nelson turned that assumption into his greatest weapon.
And I think it's a lesson that goes far beyond naval warfare. The idea that sometimes the biggest advantage you have isn't more ships or more guns, but the courage to execute a risky plan built on speed, audacity, and trusting your people. It leaves you with a question to think about, really. The pressure on Nelson was unbelievable. One ship grounding could have meant failure and disgrace. So what other figures, maybe not even in the military, but in business or exploration, have mastered that same art, that ability to delegate under immense pressure when all the conventional wisdom is screaming at you to play it safe and wait until morning?